I have quite literally never beaten a Diablo game. And I know, that's shocking, but hear me out. I was not even a swimmer when this one came out. I was a bun in the oven when this one released, and sorry, moving on. But I've been continually meaning to finally getting around to playing one of them. I actually bought Diablo 2 Resurrected on the Nintendo Switch, but it turns out recording footage on the Switch is incredibly annoying. So I decided that I'd like to play through one of the games on PC to make that whole process a little bit easier, of course, and Blizzard, in their infinite wisdom, has decided not to release Diablo 2 on Steam. So my only option, if I wanted to stay on a decent gaming platform, was going to be Diablo 4. So I decided to pick it up on a good sale and give it a go. This video, unlike me, is going to have some decent length to it by the time I'm done editing, and it's going to be chronicalizing my entire playthrough of the game as a brand new player. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and hop into character creation. This honestly looks like a fucking badass basis for a character already. Holy shit, she is built. God dang. I created my character, who was of course a barbarian. I selected my difficulty, and I spawned into the world, and I was immediately confused as hell because there was no campaign, there was no cutscene. Apparently, when you make a seasonal character, you have to manually select that you do not want to skip the campaign, even if you haven't beat the campaign yet. So I had to delete the character I just created. I had to go back through, and I had to do the character creation all over again. So character creation complete. We were now into the main campaign, and I set off on my journey slaying barrels and wolves and all other sorts of good things, and we were off to a fantastic start so far. I stumbled into the nearest town where a delirious madman was talking about a nearby set of runes that had demons coming out of them, and I met up with a very friendly and I'm sure very innocent lady who asked me to go and clear those runes so that the townspeople felt safe. So just like that, I was off to have my very first dungeon experience. Inside the dungeon, I took in the absolutely massive skill tree, still nothing compared to Path of Exile, of course, that this game has to offer, and I assigned my first skill point to Frenzy. I hit level 3, and my second available perk point went straight into upgrading Frenzy. You know the deal, another level up, another perk point. This one went straight into Rend, which was now a second skill that I had on my hotbar. I came across a conveniently placed healing well that I'm sure the game meant for me to prosper, and they were just being nice. Oh my god. Having just beat what seems to be one of the first major enemies in the game, I of course scored some sweet loot that indeed did include some upgrades for some of my current gear, and I set off to see those wonderful, welcoming people inside the town.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
I risked life and limb to go into those ruins and make sure that the townspeople had safety and they could go to bed comfortably each and every night and feel good about raising their children in this desolate village. What was my reward? Well, I got invited to the next Diddy party. In this precarious position, I was actually rescued by the raving madman that we met earlier. He turned out to be the only sane one in the whole damn village.
They're coming! The whole damned village!
I hit level 5, and with it came another available perk point, which went into Pressure Point. Then went and investigated the nearby church for any signs of blasphemous activity, as you do, and it was there that I got my first glimpse of her.
Sin is their birthright. My children. The lords of hell are coming to devour our world. Salvation lies not in the light, but in you.
The ranting and raving lunatic then sent me to hunt for a hermit out in the woods so that I could advise him of the situation with Lilith invading the world. I discovered the hermit's cabin out in the woods, so obviously the first thing I did was start going through all his stuff and finding his secrets hidden throughout it, which he didn't seem to mind too much in all honesty.
If you're going to trespass into my home, rifle through my things, then at least have the decency to join me for supper.
I then made sure to set my game difficulty to hard so that nobody could accuse me of being a game journalist. I hit level 7 and I had to think long and hard about where I was going to put this perk point because I knew it was incredibly important. So I upgraded Frenzy. I suffered my first death of the entire playthrough, which was in a basement at the hands of a swarm of spiders in the pursuit of sweet loot. Feeling unperturbed by this momentary setback, I pushed back in and managed to finish off the last of the spiders, opened up a giant chest and got myself that sweet loot that I had been pursuing the entire time. With level 8 came another perk point, which was promptly invested into Ground Stomp, which oddly enough turned out to be one of the best decisions that I made so far in the playthrough. Level 9 brought us one step closer to beating the game, but in order to get there, I first had to purchase Iron Skin. Level 10, Hammer of the Ancients. It was about here in the playthrough that I started having my first experience with what seems to be a fear mechanic where there will be an AoE cast onto the ground, and if you're in that AoE when it bursts, your character decides to just skedaddle in the opposite direction. Soon enough, level 11 came along, which was used to purchase the Enhanced Rend upgrade. For the first time, I found my loot absolutely full. My backpack was bursting at the seams, so I sat here for a few minutes just looking through potential upgrades and then dropping things I didn't need to try and min-max how much I could get out of these dungeons. And I must say, Diablo does a fantastic job of, just giving you meaningful upgrades to your loot and just giving you that very satisfying and dopamine-inducing loot pool that happens whenever you defeat an elite enemy. Level 12 went to Outburst so that I could gain a stack of thorns. For anyone who might not be familiar, this is essentially just reflecting damage, so anytime enemies hit you, they're going to take a certain percentage of it back, which, considering that I'm a barbarian running around in the middle of swarms of enemies all the time, this seemed like a fairly good upgrade to go with. And just like that, it happened. My hard drive popped up and said that it had an unreadable error, and I lost everything. That included hundreds of gigabytes of footage of Diablo 4, along with any other games that I had been recording and stockpiling footage of for the past 6 to 12 months. It got worse though, ladies and gentlemen. I took my computer into a repair shop to see if they could recover the data, and they said they couldn't. I decided to upgrade my main SSD at the time, and they said that it also showed signs of corruption. So not only did I lose all of my footage, I also had to do a completely new installation of my PC, which included every single game, every single program that I had installed. Needless to say, this was a bit of a setback and a definite motivation slasher for getting this video out. That being said, I didn't have the rest of the footage of my playthrough. I decided, instead of playing through it again and wasting this footage, which felt like really good content, I would just transition and turn this into a regular game review at the end. So the first half being the funny, witty part that you just watched, and now the second half being the review where we transition into the SWAS meter. And ladies and gentlemen, the SWAS meter, if you're new around here, is going to stand for Story, World, Action, Sound, and Style. Or, depending on how hot it is outside, it might also just mean sweaty ass. So let's go ahead and start talking about some of the positives of Diablo 4. First up is the voice acting. So I would say that the voice acting is very strong across the board. The dialogue overall is delivered very well, and there are definitely a few standout performances, especially from some of the main characters that add emotional weight to key scenes, and it feels very immersive and fitting for the blank world of Sanctuary where you play through, so there's no happy-go-lucky people. You can tell by the voice acting that everybody's kind of seen a few things and they might not be the happiest to be in the situation they're in, which, considering hell is literally being unleashed upon the world, that's probably pretty accurate. We're going to talk about visuals now. So the visuals are absolutely gorgeous. So there's extremely detailed armor sets, there's moody, very oppressive environments, and the game is just overall graphically stunning. So the visual effects team blew it out of the park on this particular title. It looks absolutely fantastic. When it comes to any sort of like spell effects, lighting, enemy design, all of that also looks absolutely fantastic. The game is very enjoyable to look at. Some of the custom skins that you can get in the shop, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well, also look absolutely fantastic. The combat is going to be arguably the most important part of any Diablo title. It's why we play the game, it's why we replay the game, and it's what brings us the most enjoyment. The combat in Diablo 4 definitely delivers, so attacks, dodges, ability chains, everything like that feel incredibly smooth, and whether you're playing as a sorcerer or barbarian, the responsiveness is definitely going to add to the game's addictive loop. There's nothing worse than a game where you're trying to put out attacks or you're trying to activate abilities and there's lag or they just don't chain together well. You can't, do it because of a stupidly long animation, those sorts of things. Diablo 4 absolutely nails the A in the ARPG genre, that is for sure. And finally, for the positives, we're going to talk about the soundtrack. This soundtrack is beautifully haunting. It sticks with you. One of the first major cities you get to has a fantastic soundtrack that you guys have been listening to in the background of this review so far. It was to the point where I sat there, I listened to it, and I liked it so much that I went out and I searched it on YouTube and listened to it some more, and now I'm using it in the review. It's definitely one of the game's biggest strengths, in my opinion. The music is going to nail the grim, kind of gothic and gritty tone that you have to this title, and it's definitely important to have a soundtrack that's really going to help to immerse you in the situations that you're playing through. And so the combat music and the music for the dungeons and everything like that is fantastically well done as well. And overall, the sound design for the game is very enjoyable to listen to. So that's not only just the music, but also things like, of course, the voice acting, but also, more importantly, the sound effects when you're activating abilities, the sound effects when you're hitting things. All of those are very immersive, satisfying, and structured very, very well, which just comes together to make it a very enjoyable and pleasing experience for your ears. Now, of course, it would not be a modern video game if we also didn't have a plethora of negatives to discuss. So let's go ahead and hop straight into it. First of all, and probably the biggest one in most people's opinion, is going to be the always online aspect of Diablo 4. So you cannot play Diablo 4 if you don't have an internet connection, and you cannot play Diablo 4 if you don't have a decent internet connection. Now, I'm Canadian, which means that a large part of our population lives in areas where the only internet connections are satellite, for example, where you're going to have 500 to 600 milliseconds of ping, and a lot of those people still enjoy being gamers, where previously with Diablo 1, Diablo 2, they could have easily downloaded those and played those at any point without any sort of limitations. I think there should certainly be an option to play this game offline, but alas, there is not. Now, forced online connectivity is definitely going to negatively impact solo players for the reason that I just mentioned, as well as the fact that nobody likes being told what to do nobody likes it, right? Especially gamers. The player interaction is extremely minimal, so the online requirement definitely feels unnecessary. Throughout my entire time playing, which has been over 40 hours so far, I have ran into exactly one other player where I had a notable interaction, and that was essentially us just standing next to each other and spinning in place to communicate because there was no other way to really do it. That's the extent of my player interaction in Diablo 4, but don't worry guys, online is mandatory. Now, let's talk about this. So the environmental design, I talked about how beautiful it was and how the visual team blew it out of the park, which I stand by. But while Diablo 4 is visually strong, many places in the game, and when I say many, I mean almost all of them, feel like set dressing. So they're lacking any sort of interaction or secrets. There's not really much of a push to explore. You don't really feel motivated to see what's behind the next corner of the world. You kind of just go quest to quest to quest. You're going to have random pop-ups that happen here and there where you can get some good gear or those sorts of things, but there's rarely any sort of a major story point or interesting side quest that you can get into. Most of the side quests appear to be just kind of fetch quests. Go here, kill that, you're done. There's nothing too crazy, and there's certainly not really any meaningful choices throughout the game, especially not ones that can really impact your story progression. And, you know, that's not necessarily something that we're coming to Diablo for, right, which we'll talk about next. But, you know, it's basically just a constant stream of combat arenas, combat zones. Then you get to a quest area, then you're back to a combat area, then you're to a major city, combat area, quest area, combat area, major city, and it just continues like that throughout the whole game, which does certainly start to feel a little bit repetitive. Now, on to the next point, which is the story. So the story, in my experience, was very predictable and overall just flat, bland, lacked seasoning. It was the equivalent of mayonnaise in a game form, and the reason for that is that major plot points are kind of telegraphed almost. There's no real twists or turns that you wouldn't foresee coming. There's no like, oh my god, that just happened sort of moment in the game. It's all kind of stuff that you would have expected, and characters don't always have any sort of emotional weight. So, you know, it's kind of overall you're going through the story with people that you might not care the most about, even though their voice actors certainly tried their best. And then you're going through a story that you don't necessarily care a whole lot about. Now, all that being said, this is not taking into consideration any of the DLC because I don't own the DLC, so perhaps the DLC is significantly better on this front. I don't know. I haven't played it. But, you know, it is what it is, right? And lastly, we're going to talk about the item shop, which is another huge downside to the game as it is currently, and why people think that the online is a negative as well. So the prices are absolutely absurd for cosmetics inside this game. Now, I come from the world of Fortnite, where it's a free-to-play game, where they primarily monetize their content through skin purchases, through, you know, purchases like that, stuff that gives you no competitive advantage, so emotes, skins, that sort of thing. The average price of a skin, which would even include a collaboration skin, so let's say with, for example, Marvel, Family Guy, those sorts of things, the average price of a skin in Fortnite is going to be anywhere between $15 to $20 Canadian, so about 1,500 to 2,000 V-Bucks. The price of a skin inside Diablo averages around $40 Canadian, and what makes that hurt even more is that the skins look fantastic, but not only that, this is already a game that we pay full price for. Fortnite is 100% free to play. Anybody can access it. You can run it on anything, right? There's so many different game modes to play. And this is not to, you know, not to meat ride Fortnite or anything like that, certainly, but it's just kind of a comparison, right? So it's a 100% free to play game in Fortnite, and you're averaging around $15 to $20 for a skin. Diablo is a paid access, even for the DLC, and you're averaging $40 for the skins, which is insane. Now, the shop also constantly repeats voice lines when you're going between different items in the shop. So I was clicking between different skins, and the vendor was saying something about, like, the cards favor me. I'd click on the next skins. The cards favor you. The cards favor you. And I just got so tired of hearing that shit in between every single skin that I just closed the item shop, and I have not gone back to it since. It was a huge disappointment, and it makes the monetization certainly feel intrusive when it's so over the top in terms of how much they're charging. Now, I do wish that they would lower these a little bit, because at the end of the day, we're paying for pixels inside a collection of pixels that we already paid for. I would love to be able to support the developers with continued purchases like that if I am playing and enjoying the game, but I am certainly not paying the equivalent of 2 games on Steam for a singular skin, especially for a game that could, at the end of the day, shut down at any point, and I won't have access to this anymore, right? So that's the thing with the always online side of it. Whenever Blizzard decides, hey, these servers are costing us too much, we're not making enough back on the game, they will turn them off, and you will not be able to play it anymore, which is something to consider there as well before you make any sort of in-game purchases. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to bring us to the conclusion as well as the overall SWAS meter rating. So just to sum everything up, Diablo 4 is going to deliver top tier visuals, very strong and interactive combat, as well as some incredible audio design that's definitely going to stick with you throughout your gaming career. However, it's going to struggle with depth, both narratively as well as in its world building, and monetization is very, very intrusive inside this game when it comes to the item shop, at least, and the always online requirement certainly helps to kind of chip away at your enjoyment inside the game, especially if you ever find yourself stuck queuing up for a server login in a game that you're going to play on your own. There's nothing better than that, right? But at the end of the day, let's go ahead and talk about it. So for the SWAS meter breakdown, here is what we have going on. So for the story, I gave it a solid 5, right? The story was not very interesting. I didn't enjoy it a whole lot, and there was just nothing really to write about it. So, you know, it's a 5. It's middle of the road, right? The world is going to get a 6. So the world is absolutely fantastic visually, but there's not a whole lot to do in it, and it doesn't really drive you to explore it, which are huge missed opportunities. It's to the point where I routinely run past dungeons because I know they're all going to look the same, and there's not going to be really anything in there apart from maybe a marginal gear upgrade piece, which I can just go and, you know, farm main story quests for anyways. The action, however, does definitely deliver with this title. I'm going to give it an 8.5%, so it's very slick, satisfying, and pretty well-paced combat. So the sound design of the game is going to get a 9. This is absolutely fantastic sound design, ladies and gentlemen. It is as close to a 10 as it can be without being literally perfect, which I haven't given out a 10 yet, I don't think, in this series. So definitely stay tuned for that. And finally, the style is going to go ahead and get an 8.5. So I definitely like the visuals of this. I definitely like how the game looks. It definitely portrays that demonic sort of environment as you'd like to see it. Now, before we go ahead and hop into the final overall rating, go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the like button down below if you like this content and you want to stick around. And if you hit the bell notification, YouTube will notify you whenever I upload. But let's go ahead and finish up here. So the overall rating is going to be 74% or a 7.4 out of 10 in my rating system. So this means essentially that it is still a very enjoyable title. I would definitely recommend to purchase it with the caveat that you want to buy it when it's on sale, preferably at a fairly hefty discount if at all possible. That's when you'll get the most enjoyment out of it. I do not think that it is worth it as a full-price game, considering some of the shortcomings that it has. But if you can get it at a 50% off, a 40% off, it might just be worth picking up. So that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for watching to the end, and I'll see you next time.